Hello, today I'm going to show you how to apply glaze onto your piece of clay. You probably saw by now that your clay has turned into bisque ware. That means it has been fired in the kiln after it completely dried out, and it is lighter in color, and it also sounds different. It sounds very strong and kind of pingy, like it's made out of glass or really strong ceramic. Now we're in the stage where you need to apply glaze. When you go to choose your color, I would suggest not looking at the color in the bottle, because you can see here this says light blue, but this looks almost white, and you can see the dried glaze on the edge, and it looks almost white. Instead, either go off of the colored picture that you see or off of one of the samples. This has been fired, and you can see that it is shiny and glossy. And this is what the light blue will actually look like when it's been fired. I will choose light blue to glaze my piece. And what you can do is shake the bottle a little bit, making sure first that the lid is on tight. And if you struggle with getting the lid unscrewed, you can tap it on the floor around the edges, and that will loosen up the dried pieces. Then you can unscrew it and pour just a little bit of glaze in the palette. Right here, I already did that. If you need more, if you're just using one color for your piece, you can just pour it in the center. Or you can use one of these cups and fill it about 1/3 of the way full. Any glaze you don't use, you will need to pour back with the brush. You'll scoop it back. So here's my glaze, and I will demonstrate on this piece. The key with glazing is that you want to layer 3 layers of glaze, but you need to let the glaze dry in between. You also don't want to scrub back and forth. So as I dip my brush into the glaze, get a nice big scoop. I'm going to gently brush it into the cracks and crevices. And it might not look solid, and that's okay. You can still see the clay through it. I'll just focus on this area. And I am dotting it into the sections that I need to. And I just want one solid layer. Don't worry about how thick it is right now. Just make sure you get every part covered. That looks good for my first layer. I don't want to scrub it too much because that will actually remove the glaze. If I do that in this section, if I scrub a lot, it actually just rubs it off. So I don't want to do that. You just want to do a nice thin layer and then let it dry. One other thing you need to keep in mind when you're glazing is that you may not glaze any part of the piece of pottery that will touch the table. So on this piece, I should glaze the top edge, the inside, this outside, but I should not glaze the bottom. Now, if you have 2 pieces, like a lid with your project or with your container, you don't want to glaze the bottom either. So you can see here's 2 pieces. This artist glazed the top edge, the inside, but they did not glaze the bottom, so that when I put it on the kiln shelf, it will not stick or fuse to the shelf. And then the lid also, I am going to fire it separately. So I'm going to place this lid on the shelf, so you may not glaze the bottom. He could have glazed this part, but just not the feet if he wanted to. But he chose not to glaze the whole surface because this will touch the kiln shelf. Whatever pieces you have of clay, I need to fire them separately on the shelf so that they don't fuse together. You can see here that this is drying, and what I'm going to do is wait a few more minutes until it is totally dry. You don't want to put your second coat if you have little pools of shiny glaze. I can spread them out so that it dries faster. You'll want to do one whole layer of your color before you do your second coat. You can see now that the glaze is lighter and more chalky looking that means that it has dried and you're ready for your second coat. You can see that there are some sections that are a little bit darker. They're not quite dry yet, but I will show you the second coat after it's pretty much dry. Another thing to note is that if you're using multiple colors, you always want to start with your light color first and glaze your light color, and then glaze your darker color next to it after you're done with your light color, because the dark colors cover better than the light colors. I'm ready for my next coat, and I'll load my brush up again and just brush gently over my first layer that I did. This is really important for the second and third coat, not to scrub your brush against your clay, because that will cause the layer underneath to be rubbed off. On this section, I put a second coat on. So now what I'll do is wait for this to dry also, and then I'll do my third coat just like I did with the second coat. Once you do 3 coats of glaze, whatever color you have, 3 coats on every part of your piece besides the part that will touch the kiln shelf when I put them in the kiln, you are all done. Just make sure you let them dry. You don't want to touch it too much, because the oils on your hands will affect the quality of the glaze. And then what you can do is clean up your area. You'll want to make sure you put your clay on the shelf. Any extra glaze you have, pour back into the bottle just by scooping it with your brush. Rinse your brush out. Also, if you do decide to switch colors because you have multiple colors, it's really important then to keep track of the number of coats you have in your sketchbook. You can use your clay sketch to mark that down. When you rinse your brush, if you're switching colors, make sure you rinse it well and then blot it to dry it off too. You don't want to water down the glaze at all. If you follow these steps, you will have a beautiful, successful, solidly glazed piece of ceramic ware. So happy glazing!